Sanderson Cosmere universe of books and graphic novels, eventually. Right now it's just books and audiobooks. I'm Nora. I'm joined by Autumn.
Hi, I'm Autumn.
Who are you joined by?
I'm joined by Tilly.
Hi there, that's me.
That's them. So basically, I'm hosting this podcast.
You're hosting this podcast. I'm going to remember that. I'm going to behave.
So basically, we all have read at least a little bit of the books in Brandon Sanderson's sort of multiverse setting called the Cosmere, whether that's Stormlight Archive, Mistborn, etc. And I think we all kind of like the books.
I like them a lot.
A little bit.
Yeah, no, they're pretty good books.
Yeah.
Should we go over... You finish your sentence, sorry.
Well, I think I might have been about to say the same thing as you, which is I was about to say something about, like, which Cosmere books I've already read. And
right, yeah. I also have an icebreaker for us.
Okay.
Oh, yeah?
Basically, to just give a quick pitch on what the podcast is, we're going to be reading through most, if not all, of the associated works in the Cosmere umbrella. I'm sure there's something we'll miss or something. We're not going to, like, play the RPG or whatever, but we're going to read all the books.
There's a lot of fucking Cosmere out there.
There's a lot of stuff. We're going to read the books, we're going to chat about it, we're going to not just... I don't just want to approach this from a place of fandom, although I think we are... We might all consider ourselves fans of a sort.
Mm-hmm.
We do want to bring criticism to it and, like, discussion about themes and actually, like, get into what's going on and what works and what doesn't. To that end, a little icebreaker for us. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and you're going to give me your answer with no explanation and no, wishy-washiness.
Okay.
I'm going to give you a question. You're going to give me its direct answer.
Okay.
Number 1.
All right.
Tilly. Who's your favorite character in the greater Cosmere setting? Just say who they are. Don't tell me anything about them. Just give me a name.
I mean, I guess Kaladin. I feel like a doofus saying that. Because he's like everyone's favorite. But yeah, sure, it's Kaladin.
Autumn, favorite character.
Kaladin. That's not a fucking question. It's Kaladin. Fuck you. That's my boy.
I
also... Okay, fine, Nora. Who's your favorite?
I think Seth right now.
Okay, Seth is a strong choice. Jumping on my coffee.
Okay, next up. What is your favorite type of magic in any Cosmere book? Just tell me what it is. Don't tell me what it does. Don't tell me how it works. Just tell me what it is.
Well, I don't have a good answer for this, unfortunately, because I've not actually read that many of these books. And other than Elantris, which I just read for this podcast, it's been, like, a long time. So, like, I don't have a good answer, sorry.
Do you have a particular surge that you like?
No, cool? That's the entire problem, is that it's been long enough since I read The Way of Kings. I don't fucking remember what the different surges are and what they do. Like, you think I kept that in my brain since 2014? Are you kidding me? Like, no.
Okay, so your answer is the magic of imagination when reading a book.
Yes! Yes. Absolutely, yes. That's the magic that I like.
So I have a similar problem to Tilly, except that I read all 3 Stormlight books 6 months ago, and I've already forgotten, like...
Less than that.
Yeah,
You were here. We were at this apartment, which we've only been at for, like, a month.
No. I read the Mistborn books since we've been in this apartment. Anyway, I do remember enough to say light weaving. I think, like, the illusion magic that, is cool. I won't say who's doing that illusion magic, because it's kind of a spoiler.
That's okay. Just saying light weaving.
Light weaving.
I think, for me, the one that's most interesting to think about and tinker with is hemalurgy.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get into that eventually.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting flash flood warnings on
We
our
are.
phones.
Oh, great.
And our last icebreaker question is, what is your favorite fake-ass fantasy word that Brandon has... Now, hold on. I mean, fake words like Arteth or Gjorn, but also, Voidbringer, Surgebinder, Lightweaver, like any of these goofy...
All this capitalized shit.
Any capitalized... Fuck those little words like Gjorn, right? What's your favorite capitalized, unique word from one of these books?
I've got my answer if you're still thinking, Tilly.
Yeah, I gotta think about this for a sec.
It's definitely investiture, because I've read, 7 of these books now, and still only have a loose grasp on what it is, and it's, maybe the most important of the words he's made up.
It's not the most important. I will say...
Wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just a word? I can believe that
I wouldn't
Brandon
be
uses
shocked.
it in a special way, but,
I'm gonna see investiture in the dictionary. We'll find out here.
Now, I definitely do agree that, it's a fake... It fully deserves to be in this category.
It's capitalized.
Because even... Yes, exactly.
The action of formally investing a person with honors or rank. So yeah, this is a real word.
Yeah.
But Brandon has made it a fake word.
Oh, 100%. That's his power. That's what he's capable of.
He can soulcast words into nonsense.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to come up with a great one for this one either. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. Yeah.
Okay, I do, at this moment in time, I am really, grabbed by the word, I guess it's just pronounced Aeon? A-O-N? Just because it's, come up a whole bunch in these first 3 chapters, and it's oh, what is it? I don't know. I mean, and, that's sort of the point of, all of these capitalized made-up words, is that you start reading the book, and you're oh, man, everyone's throwing this around. What the fuck is it? And it entices you.
Yeah.
So, this feels kind of pure that at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
I will say that I have read a decent number of these books. I've read all of Mistborn. I'm working through Oathbringer currently, so I read the other 2 Way of Kings, and the other one, the Way of Kings books. If we can call Game of Thrones, the Game of Thrones series. Anyway, and I've read a couple of the short stories. I've read a lot of the wiki, and read a lot of things that Brandon has said outside of the text. So I have a different context for some stuff. Very interested to finally get around to Warbreaker. Eventually. I might have the highest number of books read of us here, maybe.
But I've read them the most recently.
Yes.
I read all 3 Stormlight in January, February. I read the first 3 Mistborn right before we decided to do this podcast, so maybe July and June. That's it for me.
How about you, Tilly?
Yeah, so my history with these books is that years ago when I was in college, they were all super popular among my friends, and back then I read Warbreaker and Way of Kings and started Words of Radiance, and then I stopped being friends with almost all of my college friends. And so I haven't actually read any Brandon Sanderson stuff in recent enough for me to have a good memory of it, other than the first 3 chapters of Elantris, and also very briefly revisiting Way of Kings. Oh, and I also have read what's it called? The Emperor's Soul? Was that a?
Oh yeah, I read The Emperor's Soul sometime last year, which was what got me interested in these at all. So,
I also just want to say, is there anything you're looking forward to starting out? I'm most looking forward to Warbreaker as a new thing for me. What thing that you haven't read is most ooh, I'm interested to see that when we get there?
For me, probably Mistborn Era 2. Just because, I'm going to read the new Stormlight when that comes out. But for most of the other Sanderson stuff, I'm like, okay, well, I'll just put it off till it comes up on the podcast. And so, like, I did kind of, like, stop right before I would have started Mistborn Era 2. And so that's kind of like, oh, I don't know what's going on there. Like, I don't know what that is at all. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm also excited for Mistborn because, like, I actually started Mistborn back in my, my first Brandon Sanderson age. But I got really turned off by, like, the way that, like, the opening chapters are with, like, kind of like the imagery of like, a plantation. It's very intense right at the very beginning, and, it was, like, 2013, and so I was like, I think it's inappropriate for a white author to be writing this, which, I mean, I still kind of believe that now, but not necessarily in a way that would make me, like, say, and I will never read this book. But that was what I thought back then. So now I'm kind of like...
Having
now
just...
I'm kind of like... sorry.
You go.
Anyway, the point I was trying to make is just that, like, I briefly peeked at Mistborn and then, like, immediately stopped and ignored it. And so that makes me kind of, like, enticed to actually read it and, like, find out what the deal is with, like, yeah, I know, like, a tiny bit about what that magic system is, and that seems pretty sick, so.
Yeah.
Having just read the first 3 Mistborn books and being a Mistborn fan, that early stuff on the plantation is wildly inappropriate, I will go ahead and say. We'll get there when we get there, but it's rough.
There's a lot of things in these books that are rough. Not nearly to the point of this being like a Rothfuss joint, or with that other guy.
Martin? George R.R. Martin?
No, the other guy. Not... There's that other... Isn't there that other fantasy author everyone always tries to get us to read?
Is it just Steven Erikson?
Maybe? I don't think
Jordan.
Jordan, we're dangerously close to reading at any day.
Oh my... Don't read the fucking Wheel of Time. It's bad. Okay.
We have a very, very, very bad podcast idea about Wheel of Time someday, but that's not what this podcast is about.
Oh my god. This is like... So, like, all my friends who were super into Sanderson when I was in college were most of them, also really into the Wheel of Time. But their attitude towards the Wheel of Time was almost universally, well, I started reading this when I was 8. I'm not going to not finish it. And I didn't start reading it when I was 8, so I'm simply not going to start. It's like cigarettes.
That makes a lot of sense to have Wheel of Time into Sanderson as like a pipeline.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Did he work on those last book and a half?
I told someone at work when I was reading Stormlight, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm reading these books, I really like them. And they immediately hit me with, have you read Wheel of Time?
What if on this podcast we talked about Wheel of Time, but only the ones that Sanderson has written?
No.
I'd be more on board with that than reading the entire Wheel of Time, but I would still prefer not to.
So, that's kind of a little introduction to us. I guess we can jump into the book discussion.
Yeah, for this first episode, we read the first 3 chapters of Elantris, Brandon's first published novel.
For this first book, we're going to be keeping with that pace of 3 chapters an episode. Mm-hmm. That pace will change as we shift through different books. We're not going to read 3 chapters of Way of Kings at a time, probably.
Because we'll be reading it for 6 years.
Those books are long. This book, not quite as long. This is like a normal-looking book when I hold it in my hand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is one definite, like, element that you kind of lose with reading these books in, like, a digital format, like an audiobook or an ebook, is that you don't get the visual effect of, like, oh, wow, I could, like, knock someone out with this thing.
I read Mistborn all on my phone, and I read Stormlight all physical, and I don't know why it shook out that way. It just did that. That's what I did. And let me tell you, having the big floppy paperback for the Stormlight is much better than having the brick, fist-sized version.
Mm-hmm. The mass market paperback.
The airplane version.
The airplane version.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's because, I think you use the word brick. I feel like I've heard people use the word brick to refer to, big, thick, long fantasy novels before. But the thing about it's, really accurate for the mass market Way of Kings. It's not just, it's, thick and heavy. It's literally, no, this is the exact, shape, dimensions of a brick.
I could build a house out of this.
Yes.
But right before we get into, summary stuff, I will briefly touch on, I'm an audiobook reader, and an interesting thing about Sanderson is that he has kind of two canonical audiobook people that he uses on almost all of his projects now, Michael Kramer and Kate Reading. They're two really prolific audiobook people. This first book, Elantris, because they are two prolific audiobook people and they have exorbitant rates, I'm sure, is read by someone I've never heard of, because Elantris was his first novel. And so listening to a different person narrate a Sanderson book is a very strange experience for me. If I pronounce words oddly, that's why. If one of these characters shows up in a future Sanderson book and I start saying their name differently, it's because Michael Kramer and Kate Reading say it differently, and so I will just go with their pronunciations because they're the people who do this.
That being said, you're the only person with any kind of line on pronunciation for this. This book specifically has a bunch of pronunciation rules because it's a language-based story.
Mm-hmm.
So I will be deferring to you on it's probably Sarene, right?
It's Sarene in the audio.
Right.
Which sounds goofy, and I might call her Serene because Sarene sounds goofy.
It only sounds goofy because it looks like it should be pronounced Serene. Sarene is probably a real name.
Yeah, if you spelled it with some I's.
Yeah. It's only because it has E's in it that it looks odd. What's the city called? K?
It might be Kai. I don't quite recall.
Because I know you're supposed to pronounce every vowel in a word in the Arlon.
I don't quite recall some of the proper noun pronunciations because they hit you a lot in this first chapter. In these first 3 chapters.
Luckily, over at the Coppermind, which is the sort of Cosmere wiki, we have some decent summaries of chapters. I will say, be careful going to the Coppermind because it is a sort of
it's all inclusive.
It's an aggregate of all the Cosmere, and they don't mark spoilers.
Mm-hmm.
And they will just state, this character, this is what their deal is. They showed up in this book. And you're like, well, I didn't know they were in that book. But now you do. So just be careful if you're going to, poke around there alongside us. You might get hit with some spoilers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who would like to take the summary on Chapter 1?
I can do that unless you want to, Tilly.
Yeah, please go ahead. I also don't. If you just finished warning me about not going on this wiki, so I wasn't going to go on the wiki. But are you saying that it is safe to go on the part that just summarizes Elantris, or?
I think so. I haven't seen anything here yet.
This page seems to be a specifically Elantris focused. It's specifically summary Elantris. It has all of the chapters down here. It doesn't seem to...
I'm not seeing anything, at least yet, that's and Hoyd shows up in this chapter, and this is his whole fucking deal, you know?
Yeah, okay, cool.
So I'm just going to paste the link here into our chat for you.
So, chapter 1, we were introduced to Raoden? I can't remember. Raoden.
Yeah, I did find a pronunciation guide on Brandon's website.
Good.
In case you want that. I can post that link too.
Okay. So Raoden wakes up one day, pretty normal day for him. He's more hungry than usual. He calls a servant to his room. He is the crown prince of Erlen, which is a big important kingdom. And he discovers that he has been hit with the curse of the Sheod, which there is a city basically like right outside the city that Raoden's living in, Kai or Kei. Lost my train of thought. Called Elantris. At one time, there were these people who had this blessing called the Sheod, and they lived there, and they were like immortals, and they were wise, and they, you know, gave out like their wisdom and their like everything, and there was a golden age for a very long time, and then all of a sudden the Sheod turned into a curse. People don't know what the deal with that is, and basically anyone can wake up at any time and have this all of a sudden, and like they're sent to Elantris where they're essentially damned. And so Raoden is sent there, and he meets a buddy named Galadon. Meets Galadon, and Galadon explains a couple things. One, that people who have the Sheod are immortal, and two, and we get an example of this, like, right when Raoden enters the city, he, like, stubs his toe, and his toe is just gonna hurt forever. Like, you don't heal, he doesn't have a heartbeat, and so, like, any damage that you take, like, is just permanent.
Damage that you take.
Yeah, if your HP bar depletes by any amount, it won't come back. So yeah,
you no longer have natural regeneration.
Right. And so, which there is a scene of like as Raoden is entering, that he sees like, you know, one person who is a beggar gets accosted by, like, kind of a band of, like, brigands, I guess, like, bandits and ne'er-do-wells, who, like, take his food from him, and they, like, beat the hell out of him, and as Raoden is having this explained to him, like, he realizes, like, oh, like, they, like, there was, like, some pretty graphic imagery around, like, necks and bones breaking a little bit, that was just, like, oh, he's not going to recover from that. Like, he will just deal with that for eternity. And Galadon explains that, like, yeah, people either end up, like, bandits or very, very careful, and most of the people here have just gone, like, completely nuts with, like, just constantly being in pain and not having any way to deal with it.
Or hungry.
And the chapter ends on Raoden. He has, like, his father, the king, sent him to Elantris with just, like, a little bit of food, and Raoden is like, hey, Galadon, I will give you my food if you, like, hang out with me for a couple weeks and kind of, like, show me the ropes so that I don't end up just, like, you know, I don't end up being, like, beaten and being in pain for the rest of eternity, you know? And so, yeah, that's where we start off the book.
Yeah.
This chapter, I think, hits you with so much, like, explaining the dilemma that these people face, and hits you with so much, like, proper nouns and like, setup stuff and exposition stuff, that I don't have a good sense of Raoden as a character. I don't have a good sense of Galadon as a character. Like, and so I don't have a lot to add to say about this chapter off the top of my head, because it's mostly just, here is the situation that this book is going to be about.
It's very direct.
Mm-hmm.
It's very fast, and it gets started very quickly in a way that I wasn't expecting.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Just
definitely
because-
a lot of... Oh, go on.
Just because I'm used to Sanderson taking more time to slowly introduce a challenge for the characters.
Mm-hmm.
In other books, it takes more time to get characters into the main arc of the story, and they usually have some other smaller thing going on at the start.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the book... Okay, I was about to say the book literally opens on this, but that's not quite true because there's like a prologue. But the
There's
first
like a
chapter,
prologue, yeah.
But the first chapter does kind of literally open with like, oh, here's Raoden, and here's his problem. Because it's like Prince Raoden of Erelon awoke early that morning, completely unaware that he had been damned for all eternity. It's such a little like flex. Like, okay, here's my main character and his big problem in the first sentence of my novel.
It's a good first sentence.
All of these first 3 chapters start with, here's the character and here's their main deal in the first sentence. As like an introduction. Yeah. And I think that the first sentence of most Sanderson books are usually pretty good hooks.
Mm-hmm.
Like one that I do remember off the top of my head is, Seth's son Valano, truthless of Chernovar, wore white on the day he was to kill a king.
That's good shit.
It's a good line to open on.
It's these like Sanderson opening sentences are a little funny to me just because they feel like they are all like fucking king shit, but they also feel extremely conscious of the fact that they are that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Like you know that he is going out of his way to have like some baller first sentences, which is not a bad thing at all, but it is kind of funny.
I'm interested to see if we start picking out like, oh, that's such a like specifically Brandon thing to say as we move forward.
I mean, yeah, like when I listened to 3 Way of King or 3 Stormlight books in like 6 to 8 weeks, I am very excited to go through this a lot more slowly because I've never gone through a book in a slow way. I either read it slowly and don't finish it, or go through a book very quickly, and so I've never spent as much time as like picking apart like writerly things as I imagine we will end up doing in this podcast.
So the first thing that Raoden does after being put in this new situation is find some way to exert power over another person and to establish a dynamic of authority with another person because he's a prince and that's what he does.
Yes.
I do think it's kind of notable that like he's able to figure out really quickly like, oh, okay, everyone here desperately wants food. There's only one source of food. I have like some of the only food in this entire fucking city. Like that's power. I can use that.
Yeah.
Like it's not like it's absolutely like a princely thing to do, but it's specifically like something that comes across as like not every character who's had power all their life also knows how to like recognize where it lies in a new situation and like negotiate effectively in the way that Raoden does. It's honestly in a weird way almost like at odds with like I think the sense that we get of like what his life has been like up to this point has been a little bit that he's been like sheltered and his life has been fine and like now all of a sudden everything's ruined for him. But if that's the case, he's pretty good at adapting to the sudden disaster.
I do wonder because as we'll see in the next 2 chapters, Aralon, or looking at Sanderson's notes here, was it Aralon?
Yeah, maybe something like that.
Yeah, Aralon is not a big important kingdom. Mm-hmm. It's the only kingdom left that isn't part of the Fjordell Empire that is now like at its doorstep. And so I can also imagine being a like what's the word? Like a part of the ruling class of one of the few kingdoms watching the rest of the world be integrated into this empire, I can imagine that would prompt him to be more able to, like, recognize where power can be found. I think that sort of adaptivity, that could be speaking to that a little bit.
Yeah, that would make sense.
He doesn't ever think about that, though. He doesn't ever really think about politics, because he is too worried about his present, like, immediate situation. But, you know, he has to know shit, right? He's not a himbo.
He's not, yeah.
That we know of.
I would assume that, like, yeah, he has a broad grasp on, I guess, the geopolitics of his world.
Certainly enough to have Sarene be interested in him.
Yeah.
But there's not really a lot to talk about with regards to his view of world events, because he's so focused on, you know, survival and like establishing, like, where he is and figuring out what's going on, and how the Raoden works. We mentioned there's a prologue. The prologue is also just on, I think, the back of the book or on the inside cover. It's basically just, once there was Elantris or Elantris.
I'm saying Elantris.
It's, the emphasis is on E somehow, so Elantris. But it used to be Elantris. It was cool. Sometimes people would transform into gods. That was alright. 10 years ago, all that broke, and now the transformation still happened, but they make you terrible, cursed people that get locked up in the city and left to rot forever. No, there's not much in the way of a prologue compared to what we'll get to later.
Yeah, it's kind of just like some setup.
We should probably move on to chapter 2, but I was just going to very briefly touch on, there was one line about Raoden in this chapter that jumped out to me, which was that the Raoden happened to other people far away. Like, that's the thought that he thinks, is that, like, Raoden doesn't happen to the Crown Prince of Erlen. The Raoden happens to other people, you know.
Not me.
Yeah.
Which is...
And it's kind of...
Sorry, you go.
It's clear that, like, he knows that that's kind of not true, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, that he understands on some level that, you know, there's not actually any kind of... It's not like he really believes that the Raoden only takes people who don't live in his city or people who aren't politically important or whatever. It's just that that's, like, how he's coping with that idea.
Yeah. Like, he realizes he's being stupid as he's saying it, but that is the thought that crosses his mind.
But it hasn't prompted I'm the same as everyone else. He's still a prince. He's not going to have the revelation of, like, oh, we're all the same, and the only difference between me and someone else who has the shield is that I have a big fancy house. He's not...
To be fair, it's not like he does have a big fancy house anymore. Like, he's kind of not a prince anymore.
I mean, he could become a prince of Elantris. He could have the biggest, fanciest house. He gets put into a Dark Souls level. Like, the beginning of this is just like the starting stage of any Dark Souls, where all of the, like, decrepit village with all of the dregs running around.
Yeah. But Brandon, like, is a gamer, right?
Yes. On the next episode of Export Audio, whenever we get Molly on, we found in his most recent newsletter his list of his top 10 video games ever, and I am going to be reading that on the next episode of Export. It's a very funny list to me, so look forward to that, everybody.
I can't wait to hear Sanderson's thoughts on fucking Chrono Cross or some shit. So, who wants to take...
Chapter 2.
I could do it?
Okay.
Sure.
Go for it.
So, this chapter introduces Princess Sarene, who arrives, via ship in Erlen, Erelon is what I'm just going to say, because that makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, and what she discovers when she gets there is that her betrothed is dead, which means, according to the terms of her contract, the marriage contract, that she's now considered to be a widow. So it's as though they got married and then he died, even though she just got here and they haven't actually had the wedding ceremony or anything. And the man to whom she's betrothed, who has died, is Raoden. So we immediately know they're covering up this whole Sheod thing. And she's kind of going around with this glowing sphere called Ash, who seems to be some kind of who's something called a Seon, which is not really clarified at this point, but you get the vibe that these are some kind of magic servants of some sort. And Ash is kind of giving her all the technical details on her marriage contract and the fact that she is really, at least as far as the laws of this country, she's pretty much stuck. And she goes to the wake, where the vibes are bad. Not just because, obviously, it's the wake for, a prince, so it's not good. But also, they won't let her look in the casket, and the king, her new father-in-law, is not even there. So she finds the whole thing kind of suspicious. And she does eventually she does meet with the king, who basically brushes her off. It seems pretty clear that even though legally speaking she's his daughter-in-law now, and that's supposed to mean that they have a political alliance, he does seem to view it as well, now that my son, who you're supposedly married to, is dead, you don't matter anymore. Because he brushes her off pretty rudely. Mm-hmm. And basically fobs her off on the queen, who is kind of misogynistically portrayed as a chatterbox.
Yeah.
It's a little weird to say oh, this is misogynist when it's in the same scene as a female character who's a full person. But it is that. And then she Skypes her dad.
She turns the Seon into the fucking flu network from Harry Potter because it turns into her dad's head floating next to her, and then his Seon turns into a big floating her head so that they can chat with each other.
Yes, pretty much. Yes, that's how they call each other. And they have kind of a cute conversation. It's definitely oh, well, we just had a mean, rude king, and now here's a nice dad king. Mm-hmm. And she kind of they talk about what's happened and the shitty situation she's in right now, and her dad is kind of oh, well, do you want to come home now? This sucks. I can throw around my political weight for you. And she's no, we need this alliance. It's still valid, even if I'm not going to get to fuck anybody now.
I mean, she probably still could.
Well, yeah. I mean, you get the sense that she actually was kind of hopeful that she and Raoden could have had a relationship, she's not unrealistic about it being an arranged political alliance, but she was hoping to hang out with someone, I guess, and now she can't do that.
I wanted to talk about how Sarene is the blueprint for every other woman that Sanderson will ever write.
Yes.
Yeah, even though I've read 2 other Sanderson books, I was immediately oh yeah, this is just Shalyn, and also the girl from Warbreaker.
And Vin.
And Yasna.
And yes. This is the woman that he writes.
Yeah.
To be fair, she's a pretty, cool woman. I like her.
Yeah, I like her a lot.
I love a girl boss princess. A monarch who's also a girl boss, please.
I have two... I have two thoughts. One is that the difference that I noticed between this being his first published novel and his other books where he's probably developed his craft more is that, like, the book kind of announces the type of character she is. Like, she calls her dad on the Pawn Pilot, and he's like, oh, well, you know, she's a real hellion in court, and she's gonna cause a lot of trouble in court in the next, 60 chapters of this novel, and that's the thing that she does. And it's like, in later novels, we would just see her causing hell in court. We would just see a scene where she's stirring shit, you know?
Yeah, it's a little, it is a little,
It is very... Huh?
Nothing.
No, I was just going to say it's a little
feel
ham-fisted.
shallow.
Mm-hmm.
I said blueprint because everything in this seems more basic than other things that Sanderson will write in the future, which is interesting to look back on. This is not the first novel he wrote. This is just the first one that got published.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We'll, many episodes from now, we will talk about the first book that he wrote, which was White Sand, which didn't even get published as a novel, only as a graphic novel. But
are you saying that's worse? Hey.
Just the way that, like you said, her gimmick is introduced, and also, here's Good King, here's Bad King.
Yeah.
Bad King says, go do your knitting, or whatever women do. Bad King is specifically sexist in a way that we as Earth people understand sexism.
Mm-hmm.
Not sexist in the way that this fictional culture would have sexism.
It's very...
he gets much more interested in talking about what cultural norms are in later books than he is here.
It definitely does remind me of, I feel like when I was a little kid, there were a lot of fantasy novels that I read that were all about, noble women dealing with misogyny, you know? This is not meant as, a criticism, but that's kind of Tamora Pierce's entire oeuvre, right? You all can still hear me okay, right?
I can hear you. It seems like Nora is having trouble hearing you, and I'm trying to, silently,
I can hear you now. I keep having to exit and rejoin the call. This is the second time that I've lost Tilly.
Really annoying.
Next time we will have the headphone splitter, and it will just be fine. But...
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's cool. No, it's all good. I just wanted to make sure, because there's also the...
Yeah, I was, trying not to interrupt either of you while also, waving at Nora to be like, oh, Tilly started talking.
Anyway, so what I was going to say about this whole, noble women facing misogyny thing, it's very, the idea of what misogyny looks like in, this sort of pseudo-European medieval context, is a little cartoonish, you know?
Yeah.
It's even, I don't know, even if you set aside completely the idea that, misogyny against a princess is, the worst possible thing, which, on some level that is kind of stupid. But even that aside, the kinds of things that are, misogynist tropes, the go do your knitting or whatever.
Right.
Okay, I guess in this setting, women do fiber arts. I guess that's just the same in this totally new created fantasy world as it was in, our modern conception of European history. Because it's also not even, as it turns out, fiber arts haven't always been exclusively a female thing.
Huh.
I don't know an enormous amount about this, but I know a little bit about it because I used to be a knitter and kind of a fiber arts nerd. And so, for example, for a long time in Europe, weaving was exclusively a male professional activity. Whereas spinning and embroidery were women's work. And, so people often have this idea when they're doing, medieval fantasy that, all fabric production is done by, princesses in towers when... Like, it's an industrial activity.
Are you saying that more modern perspectives warped history to enforce like a harsher gender divide among modern societies? That doesn't sound very realistic.
Something like that.
We are also introduced. Actually, I was having a different thought that kind of ties into what we were saying more, which is that there is, and I don't want to get ahead of myself too much, but Sexist King is also a character that shows up in the Mistborn trilogy, and as soon as he shows up, like a Sexist King shows up as a character here, I was like, oh no. Because Sexist King is the worst character that Brandon does, in my opinion. And the king, Eaden, I believe.
Eadon, maybe?
Eadon, that we meet in this chapter is, like, just intolerable to me. I hope that we don't spend too much of the book dwelling on him. I imagine he will be a pretty major character, but hopefully Sarene has a B plot that doesn't involve him, maybe.
I will say, next week, we will find out that she has a rival.
Okay. I love a rival.
Yeah, he's great.
Oh, I was excited because Girl Rival is the Sanderson character that I like a lot.
Not so much Girl Rival as, you might call him a priest rival.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait. Never mind.
We'll get there, because I have only read these first 3 chapters, so we'll get there, I guess.
I just really like Hrathen. That's all.
One last thought about this chapter is that the other person that we meet, another classic Sanderson character, is Magic Servant.
Yes.
This was... Ash is, like, kind of nothing for me so far. Like, it's interesting that Ash is a floating ball of gas, but is mostly... mostly so far a, like... Well, it would be weird if Sarene was just thinking all this exposition to herself, so I'll just give her a servant character that she can have exposition dialogue with and explain to you the political situation of, like, Fjordell, and, like, her kingdom is going to marry into this kingdom to create an alliance. Introduce magic.
Because there's a thing in the center of Ash.
Oh, I missed that part.
There's an Aeon in the center.
Wait, yeah.
And it's also, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't there also kind of a vibe of, like, she thought there would be more of these Seons around,
there's a point where she's like, oh, I heard that these were really common down here. I thought that, like, everyone had Seons. And then Ash, like, leaves her during the wake to go check around and see it. What's Ash?
Ash has a page on Compromise. We're gonna risk some spoilers to
it. Looks like it. Also, some cute fan art of Sarene.
Nice.
It goes off to find more Seons, and it's like, yeah, I only found a couple of them, and nobody really wants to talk to me.
Okay.
So there was this perception that, down in Arlon, there was way more magic shit happening than there actually is.
For what it's worth, the book does seem to give Ash he, him pronouns.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, I got
That's what I thought, but I couldn't remember. And so then
what I have here is, assuming you remain in Erelon, my lady, Ash said in his deep voice. So.
Okay. So, yeah, we will use he, him for Ash.
Oh, I looked at the wrong sentence on this page.
Okay.
It was talking about the Aeon as it, because of, yeah. Anyway, him. He has a deep voice. I'm just imagining Peter Dinklage from Destiny as the little floating friend.
You mean Nolan North from Destiny?
That Surge Binder came from the moon. And the last thing... We talked about King Evanteo.
Yeah, it's like her dad.
Yeah.
He has a cute nickname for her. Actually, he has multiple cute nicknames for her.
We stand a good dad.
Wow, a good dad in a Sanderson novel? Who isn't one of the main characters? I'm talking about Kaladin, by the way, not Dalinar. Are we ready to move on to Chapter 3?
Sure.
Yeah, I think I've talked about everything I got. This is the chapter that I kind of like blew past me a little bit, so...
This has... The first 2 chapters on this page have a paragraph each. This one has 4 paragraphs.
Mm.
There's a lot of like geopolitics in this one.
Yeah,
a lot.
Much more so.
Hrathen, Fjordell Gjorn arrives by ship in Arlon to convert the people to Shudareth, is how this summary starts.
All true.
Yeah, that's so true. Basically, he shows up. He's a cool, older guy in red plate armor and a cape. And he walks right on in and takes control of a small chapel to...
Sorry.
He shows up in this cool red plate armor and a cape, and he takes control of a church in Arlon that is a Fjordell church, specifically dedicated to worship of Jadeth. Basically, he has been sent by Wyrn Wulfden IV, who is the theocratic ruler of the Fjordell Empire, and is considered to be the incarnation of their god, to the point that written orders from the Vern, maybe?
I don't recall on this one. I'm sorry.
Are considered scripture. He has orders to convert this culture to the Fjordell religion in 3 months, or else it will be conquered and destroyed by force and brought into the Fjordell Empire. This is one of the last 2 remaining kingdoms not currently integrated or conquered by the Fjordell Empire. And so, basically, Hrathen has to do an imperialism for the good of the people living here.
Mm-hmm.
He has to save them, not from being the wrong religion. He has to save them from the church with all the swords for being the wrong religion.
He's literally on a mission.
He's on a mission from God.
So I guess this is something that I wasn't totally clear on reading this. Is the destruction that's coming in 3 months if he doesn't succeed in his holy mission? I guess I kind of thought they were saying that like God was going to smite them, like with lightning and meteors and stuff. But I mean, I'm not saying that it doesn't make sense for them to view like material, mundane warfare as their God's will, because that's the kind of religion they have.
Yeah, I think when they say that Jadeth will strike it down, they literally mean like the military conquest as an agent of Jadeth's will. Because they...
That's
Sorry?
I just think that is an interesting interpretation. I think you're probably right. It's just kind of funny to me that they're even bothering with this 3-month window, given that, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I guess there's an... what I wonder, given that, is, what does Fjordell get out of, converting them peacefully? Because, my previous understanding of this was, they want him to convert this city so that they can actually rule it, as opposed to it being, destroyed by divine nuclear fire. But if the destruction that's coming is just, a military conquest of, I guess, a more normal type, then I guess, I don't totally understand what the purpose is of trying to convert them in the first place.
It might be that, like, if they don't get converted, they will just be killed rather than, like, conquered.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the city has some, like, material wealth that they don't want to diminish by conquering it, would be my guess.
We also only have one perspective. We only have Hrathen's orders from Wulfden IV, which, you know, he makes a point in this chapter of, like, not showing every context to his subordinates, and I can easily imagine not the full context being given to Hrathen as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I do remember, it's been 4 years since I read the first, like, 12 chapters of this book. For the old version of this podcast that still lurks in some corners of the internet. I think next Hrathen chapter will get a little more context that will help this specific point.
Okay.
But basically, that's his deal. And what he does is he goes up and he gathers all the Arteths, which are the priests, in this Fjordell church. And he's like, well, you've all been fucking up a whole bunch. You've been lazy, and you've let shit slide, and you're speaking their language instead of the obviously superior Fjordell language. And so Fionn, who is the head Arteth, is that right? High Arteth? Or head Arteth. The Derethi head Arteth. He sends Fionn back on a ship. We go back to the main empire. And then encounters Dilaf, who I think I remember not caring for Dilaf.
Mm-hmm.
Dilaf is a convert to the Derethi religion. He's Arlene. He's not Fjordell. But we learn that, you know, Jedith has a place for everyone in his empire, even if Fjordells are more equal than others. And so Hrathen basically offers him this position as his Odiv, being sort of an assistant and also basically a slave. I think that the actual authority involved there is you become basically a slave to this person, but their position in the church determines where you are. Your hierarchy is as well. Where yes, you have to do anything I tell you to, but other people have to reckon with that you have authority over them because you're the head Arteth's Odiv. So it's not like all Odivs are the same.
Mm-hmm.
It is basically, like, in this context, it's basically a promotion for this guy.
Yes.
A promotion into slavery.
Yes.
Right. Well, but he already, the thing is, you know, he already was a priest who had to listen to everything that this person told him to do anyway, right? It's just that now he has to listen to everything that he tells him to do personally and not just, I guess, professionally.
And also, he's actually an Arteth now because Fionn gave Dilaf the title of Arteth, which he couldn't do. You're not allowed to give someone else the same rank that you have.
Mm-hmm.
It has to come from someone higher than that rank. And so he had the title, but it wasn't really actually legit until Hrathen showed up and made it true that he was a full Arteth and a full member of this church, even though he wasn't a Fjordell person. Lots of talk about I don't know what the Fjordell, clearly a very Viking inspired culture, from the way that everything is written and the way that the map of Fjordell has a very generic Viking video game font on the map in the book.
Although, like, in terms of like what I would say is like influences on their religion, I don't think it's very Viking looking to me.
For sure. But it, in the Arlon and Teod are very much kind of European. We get one character, Galadon, in Raoden's chapter, who's from the Duladel Republic, which has recently fallen to Fjordell, and he's the only person who's specifically noted to not be white.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting, at least, to think about. There's clearly some difference between Arlon people and Teod people and Fjordell people, but they are all white.
Mm-hmm.
It seems.
Yeah.
This is a theme that Brandon will return to.
Yes. The thing that is interesting, a lot of this chapter kind of went over my head a little bit because of all the proper downs, but the thing that is interesting to me, hearing you talk about it now, is the real-world context of Brandon being Mormon. Yes. And this character is literally on a mission from God to get people to start speaking the language that God speaks. You know?
Yeah.
I don't know, especially at this stage in his career, I don't know how introspective Sanderson is about the Mormon Church. I don't know if, like, he's deliberately playing on these themes, but it is an interesting, like, line that I have picked up on immediately.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to me, like, to me, I look at, the, like, Fjordell faith, and I'm like, oh, this is just fantasy Christianity, right? In terms of, like, in terms of the kinds of, the fact that it has this strict hierarchical structure, and the fact that it's, like, totally integrated with this imperial project, and, like, also the emphasis on scripture. Like, not to say that Christianity is the only religion that's ever done all those things, but, like, the vibe is very fantasy Christianity to me. But then, like, as far as whether I think that it's believable that, like, because it's very easy to write fantasy Christianity without realizing that you're doing it if you are, like, a Christian in a Christian society, which, I mean, I don't know. There are probably people who would argue about whether Mormons count as Christians, but I think for the purposes of what I'm talking about here, they certainly do, in the sense that, like, Mormonism is a faith that, like, you know, worships Jesus Christ.
I'm like, you've prompted a thought from me now, which is, do you think that this becomes Brandon taking a shot at Catholicism? Is this going to be a Mormonism versus Catholicism, like, shadow struggle?
What I was about to say is, I think that, like, okay, I don't want to put too many words in Brandon's mouth here, but I suspect that most Mormons would see the idea of a state religion as something that they are, like, opposed to, because, I mean, you know, I believe Mormonism was banned in some U.S. states at some times, and, like, certainly it's always been a minority religion in the U.S., and one that is, like, even though, you know, for someone like me who is not Christian, I'm like, Mormons, Catholics, like, same shit, but, like, that's not how Mormons and Catholics see it.
Right.
And, I think that, like, you know, the, like, Fjordell shit is obviously, like, transparently very villainous. But I definitely get the vibe of, like, part of what we're supposed to think is villainous here is theocracy. And I'm not sure that, like, I don't think that Brandon Sanderson recognized the ways in which the United States is a theocracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, like, in places where, you know, Mormon churches are powerful, like, they are integrated with the state, even if it's not in a formal way where, like, you legally have to be Mormon to live in some places, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like Mitt Romney was very nearly president of the United States. Like.
Very nearly.
Yeah.
There's a little lifting going on with some of those words. Like,
yeah, well,
I guess you could say he got as close as somebody could get.
Yeah.
And then he ran. But
I'm also just thinking about, like, how, like, in a community, in a Mormon community, right? Like, the people who, like, are on, like, the city council and, like, the people who, like, run the local police department and that kind of thing are very likely to be Mormons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course that's the case with lots of other you know, Christian denominations in different places in the U.S. Like, I don't want to make it sound like I think that it's just Mormons.
Yeah, no, yeah.
In the United States.
It's weird. Only Mormons ever run for office.
I mean, yeah, like, there was, speaking of, like, people being on city councils and being the chief of police, very similar situation in my hometown, and, like, the Baptist church was the biggest church there, and they're, like, you know, 4 of the 10 city council members all went to the same Baptist church, you know, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. That's the reality of a lot of this country.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like the way that you know, the way that Fjorden is a theocracy is much more like the kind of thing that I think Americans think of as, like, oh, we don't have that. Like, we have separation of church and state, so we don't have this kind of power structure, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Right. This is a very, like,
they explicitly believe that their political leader is divine. Their political leader and their religious leader are the same person.
And yeah, that is a kind of a Protestant
axe to grind.
Sort of a Protestant grudge to think about popes and shit.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, you know, there's only so much we can say about this in chapter 1 or 3, as the case may be. I'm keeping an eye on it. I'm by no means a religious scholar or a theologian or any of these other things. I have friends who are, but I will certainly be interested to see where this goes, and I think that at the very least, some kind of general literary critical eye on the themes will still elucidate something from this material, even if I don't have the real world, like, parallel knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm interested to see where this goes, because I have no idea. Like, I only read a few chapters of this book 4 years ago. I don't know, is Hrathen, like, the main villain of the book? Is there a main villain of the book? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Shrug.
One thing I've definitely been kind of thinking about, so, like, it's clear that when Hrathen, like, blows into town, a lot of his kind of immediate agenda is to, like, kick the asses of and, like, eject all of these, you know, corrupt artists who have been, like, seduced into the Arelon way of life or whatever. You know, like, he's mad at them for speaking their language, etc. But there's also definitely a danger that the people back in Fjorden are going to view Hrathen in the exact same way, right? Because, like, he's the guy who's been sent to Kaye to, like, ostensibly save it. And, like, you know, when the actual war comes, because I'm sure he's not going to succeed in fucking converting the whole city in 3 months. Like, that's obviously impossible.
Yeah.
Unless, you know, it's impossible short of, I guess, some weird magic shit happening, which could happen. But, I'm assuming that in 3 months there's going to be a war here. And obviously, I would assume that Hrathen is going to be on the Fjorden side of that war, but it's going to be after 3 months when he's been trying to, like, make connections and persuade people in this city. So I can't imagine that his sympathies are going to be totally unmixed there, and I think his superiors will know that and probably, you know, have some kind of response to it. I don't really know what that would be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely see that. I can definitely see if I am wrong about it being literal war, and if there is some divine magic nuke coming, I can also definitely see, like, Hrathen is, like, trying to stop that. And that's
I was just looking at the actual, the letter that Hrathen has, and it does make it sound like it's the holy destruction that's coming in 3 months is war, not, like,
magic
total
nuke.
destruction. Yeah, it says, my faithful warriors are prepared, and they wait only the word of my wern. At the end of that time, the holy soldiers of Fjorden will descend on the nation like hunting predators. So it does sound like, we are talking about soldiers arriving, and the reason they're so confident in saying that will be the destruction is because they're so confident in the power of their army. It's not like...
Right.
Which I think the reason that I had that idea in my head that, like, this destruction means, like, smiting, is because... I honestly think it is because of some stuff I was reading in Moby Dick not that long ago. Because of, there's a bit where someone does a sermon on the Book of Jonah. And the Book of Jonah is about someone who has been given kind of the same task that Hrathen has of, like, being told by God, okay, you got to go to this place and tell everyone there that they're being evil and they need to follow my religion and stop doing what they're doing. And if you don't do that, I'm going to kill all these people. Except that, like, and that happens a number of times in the Bible, that, like, some prophet or other is told to, like, go tell everyone in the city that they're evil and God is mad at them. But the thing that's, like, striking in Jonah's case is that eventually it works. Like, he gets there and he tells everyone, like, hey, God is mad at you. And they're all like, oh no, and they repent and start wearing, like, sackcloth and ashes, and God doesn't destroy them. But in that context, the destruction that might be coming from God if they don't shape up is very clearly, like, you know, like a catastrophic thing. It's on a scale with, like, getting swallowed by a whale. So, like, that was the parallel, I think, that was standing out to me and making me assume that that's kind of the threat. The fact that it's not the threat does kind of... you know, it does leave me kind of wondering, like, okay, in the setting where, like, supernatural stuff does exist, what kind of proof of Jadith do they have? You know, like, what can...
Oh, yeah.
Can Artith, like... Can Artiths, like, throw fireballs or something? Like, and if they can't... if they can't, like, what is their claim for being, you know, the sole... the people who know the sole truth of God, if there's magic powers and they don't have them? I would assume they do have magic powers, but...
They also... There's a brief mention of something, where, Hrathen remarks that most zealots don't join this church. They're usually more drawn to the Jaskari mysteries, which is just a cool thing that exists. That's where all the hardcore fuckers go.
So, yeah, that's something that I found interesting, because it's obviously narrated in Hrathen's point of view, right?
Right.
Because I would say Hrathen is a zealot. He seems zealously devoted to his religion, and, like, perfectly fine with an entire people getting basically wiped out if they choose not to follow that religion. But he doesn't see he's like, oh no, our organization is not a place for, like, wild-eyed zealots. That's where other people go.
But he has logic and rationality. Not just passion.
Yeah, it does seem like that's kind of the vibe, is that he's like, oh, it's people like my religion if they believe in facts and logic.
He has a sword labeled facts and logic.
God. The idea that, like, that people are going to have, like, a sort of undirected zealotry that they could just sort of put in any religion is very weird.
Yeah.
That's a very, very strange perspective for someone in a feudal context to have, because that is, like, only really a view of religion that you can have in, like, you know, like a post-Enlightenment context where the idea that your religion is a choice, like, exists, as opposed to, and, like, it's particularly weird in this setting where, like, very clearly religion is, like, an ethnic marker, right?
Right.
Like,
we don't know.
I don't
John
imagine...
Locke could exist in Elantris.
Maybe that's who Raoden is.
Who fucking knows? But, like, the idea that you're getting the way he's talking about zealots, it makes it sound as though, like, people in this setting are doing the thing that people do in real life, where they, like, read up on a bunch of religions and then are like, all right, this is the one I'm going to follow. When, like, I don't see how that would even be possible in a world like this, you know?
Yeah.
There's also the possibility... since this is only mentioned offhand, that Giscari Mysteries refers to a different aspect of this religion.
Yes, that would make sense.
Like a different denomination or something.
Or, like, the Hrathen is some sort of branch of the church that goes off and does missions, and the Giscari Mysteries are people who minister to the believers or something.
Fight.
Yeah.
Or fight.
Yeah, different...
It could...
I'm imagining, just because he calls them mysteries, I'm imagining that they do some sort of, like, weird mystical shit that no one else understands.
God, I hope they throw thriballs.
I meant more like shutting themselves up in caves and having visions, but yes, that would also be
rule too. That would rule too.
I know nothing about what the magic is in Elantris. Other than, like, extremely vague ideas. So Sanderson likes to detail a magic system that follows an arcane thermodynamic rules, by which I mean literally arcane, not unfollowable. So, whatever's happening in this world, we'll know all about it by the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did go to look at the, the appendix, after you defined what Ars Arcanum is. And the only thing that seems to be there for at least my copy of the book is a glossary of aeons. Which is useful in that it lets me know, like, what that cute little symbol at the beginning of the chapter was. On the first page of each of the chapters that we read, there's, like, a little glyph-looking thing in a circle. And it turns out that for all 3 chapters, that's the aeon. The one that means, like, first.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Right. I feel like we're probably hitting time, especially because I have work in an hour. But I wanted to quickly touch on something that I just remembered because of us talking about, like, the Ars Arcanum. There is, like, a 10th anniversary edition of this book that is, like, slightly different from the book that was first published.
That's the version I'm holding right now. It's the 10th Anniversary Author's Definitive Edition with 10,000 words of bonus content, and I'm going to call bullshit on that.
Well, okay, so...
In a second.
So, when I was reading up on Reddit about what the differences between the versions are, it's mostly that there are some, like, scenes that he cut in the back. There is an additional epilogue that ties it into some Cosmere stuff, it sounds like.
Ooh. There's the Mad Prince.
And then there is, in the actual text of the book, it sounds like some edits made. Probably not additional scenes, but, like, probably him tightening up, like, oh, this scene, like, runs too long, or something like that. I don't have a good sense of, like, how it's different, only that, like, there are some changes throughout the book. As far as I know, Nora and I are both reading the 10th Anniversary Edition. I don't know which one you're reading, Tilly. I don't imagine it'll matter too much, but I felt like it was something worth bringing up in this first episode.
Yeah, I think mine is not the 10th anniversary edition, simply because it doesn't say anything about that, and you'd think it would.
Yeah, it would if it was the 10th one. So, yeah, you'll probably have like a slightly different version in a couple spots, but the main thing about the 10th anniversary edition is like additional content in the back of the book. There are changes in the book, but none of them sound like substantive, you know?
Yeah.
So
I might get my hands on the 10th anniversary edition and, like, you know, just to, like, I guess make that comparison, potentially, but I might also not bother to do that. I don't know.
I think also the 10th anniversary edition has between Elantris and Mistborn, he put out a short story follow-up to Elantris that I believe is just printed in this book, is the other big thing, I think. The Hope of Elantris, so.
Cool.
You can't call it deleted scenes in a book. There's
the idea... The idea of 10,000 words of bonus content is such a, like, wow, he really is a gamer.
He is such a gamer.
That's the frame rate of books. And it has like, deleted scene, The Mad Prince, and it's like, it's not a movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's not. What's next? You call you put some bad chapters from the first manuscript. You call it your blooper reel. Like, he has a blooper reel for Mistborn on his website where it's like, this was my original first draft of the first chapter with Vin. She was a very different character and it sucked. Anyway, here you go.
Mm-hmm.
And she's just a bad kind of a I guess just shallow sort of femme fatale girl, rather than being like Vin. But that's.
I mean. Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, like, I feel like that's the kind of thing you can get away with when you have the kinds of fans who will, like, obsessively update your wiki.
Yes.
Like, that's the kind of person who wants to read the stuff you left on the cutting room floor.
That, I think, is going to do it for our first episode of Ars Arcanum. Should we make an email, probably?
I mean,
I got these questions from my DMs.
You really believe in, like, the bespoke podcast email. I really believe in everybody should just send things to exportaudiopodcast@gmail.com.
What was that email?
exportaudiopodcast@gmail.com. If you want to make a bespoke podcast email, I'll edit that in. But,
no, that's fine.
Yeah.
exportaudiopodcast@gmail.com. Just put Ars Arcanum, I guess, in the subject line. But also, we exist on the internet.
We do.
Yeah.
That's true.
So, Tilly, if someone wanted to find you on the internet, where would they go?
Yeah, you can find me at Shar Asnablunt on Twitter.
It's a good app.
It's a good one.
But, yeah, I stole it from Jackson. And you can also hear me on a different podcast called Higgledy Piggledy Whale Statements, which is on the Abnormal Mapping Network. You can just find that, you know, if you type Higgledy Piggledy Whale Statements into your, like, search thing, you'll find it.
You'll find it.
It's on, yeah. Nothing else is called that.
You find me on Twitter at autumnal_coffee. We were recording this on Wednesday. Tomorrow, Thursday, I'm going to be uploading the third episode of Hot Singles, which is very exciting. Aeroplane is going to make a triumphant return next week. We're going to try and do export soon. Podcasts are happening. I don't do other work besides podcasts, thank God. So yeah, Export Audio Podcast, Hot Singles, and then an Aeroplane on the Abnormal Mapping Network.
You can find me on Twitter at Neither Nora. You can find stuff I do at norablake.online. You can support this show by going to patreon.com/exportaudio or exportaud.io and giving us $1 or more, your choice.
I like it when you give us more. Personally.
$1 means that you get access to 2 bonus shows, which are Import Audio and Duo Lane. I do a podcast called We Are the Champions with Olivia, where we talk about League of Legends, and Duo Lane is our goof-off podcast, where it started out as we play League of Legends and hang out, and now it's become a Kamen Rider Kiva podcast, as we talk about 2 episodes of Kamen Rider Kiva every week. It's fun. Import Audio is me and Curly hanging out because we do a Mega Man podcast called Rush Jet Radio, which is all of these are on the Export Audio Podcast Network. We're watching all of the Mega Man animated canon, which is like the Ruby Spears TV show, and then we're moving on to all the anime. And every month we're also playing one Mega Man video game, and it's a full franchise retrospective podcast. You can find all that stuff on the Patreon. $1 gets you the podcast, $5 gets you Stellar Missive, which is a blog that I do every month. I write about stuff.
I might contribute to that someday.
Maybe. And yeah, in an effort to live by follow the examples of the Shrieking Shack.
Okay.
I am reading another book. And so my personal sort of challenge as we do this podcast is that I'm already setting aside time to read Sanderson books. Mm-hmm. And I'm setting aside time, an extra 20 minutes, to read another book with whatever Sanderson book we're reading. And currently, I'm reading Gundam. I don't know what the book is actually...
That's not a book.
I don't know what the book is actually called. It is a book.
I know.
It's a book trilogy, really.
I guess it's a trilogy. I guess that's 3 books. I thought it was 3 acts of a book. It's the Gundam book. It's the novelization of the original Gundam anime series by Tomino himself. That's what I'm reading. I'm reading 1 chapter with every batch of Elantris chapters, and I hope I can finish that book. It'll take me longer than it will Elantris, but my goal is to just, since I'm doing this podcast, I'm just going to read more books.
I already read a lot of books, so I'm good.
Yeah.
Tilly got a book podcast. She's good.
Yeah, your meat is huge. Both of you.
Yeah, all I do is read books that are much too long, very slowly. That's me.
I've gotten very into short books. I love a short book. I'm reading...
Dust Jacket.
I'm reading Tahanu right now by Ursula K. Le Guin, and then I'm probably going to read a Stephen King book because I hate myself.
After Gundam, I have a couple of things I want to do. I'm not theming this. I'm not pairing books to the Cosmere stuff we're reading. I just have a backlog and I want to work through it. And yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Do we have a podcast sign-off? Oh, you go.
I feel like if you were pairing books thematically to Sanderson books, I don't think Gundam would be it.
No.
Not for this one. Maybe if that were the case, I would save Gundam for Stormlight, probably.
I guess? I don't know. Anyway. Podcast sign-off.
Do they sing things in...
May your heart be your guiding key.
I mean, they do say things. They say the oaths, but not in this book.
I will podcast even for those who hate me, so long as it is funny.
Until next time, say the oaths.
Oh.